Hello, it's Jacob Jarvis here from the Oh God What Now podcast, and I'm with fan favourite, gone but not forgotten, Naomi Smith of Best for Britain. Naomi, how's it going?
Hi Jarv, really good to see you here in Liverpool, outside of our usual haunt of North London.
Yeah, I know I'm a little bit disorientated being this far away from Islington, but it's feeling okay so far. But for you, the conference, how's it going? What's the vibe like? And yeah, how have you been finding it?
For us, it's going incredibly well. We've got two really big exhibition spaces. We've been having fringes. Tonight we've got an event with the Kebab Awards, the great annual event of the political calendar. It's normally in London. We've brought the Kebab Awards here to Liverpool, so it's going really well. It is a very different conference to recent years. I think there was over 16,000 delegates. It's all very slick. The exhibition area is about twice the size of normal. The number of fringes has practically doubled. It all feels very upbeat, of course, coming fresh off the heels of a pretty stunning victory in Rutherglen last week.
Yeah, I mean, how does that feel? We've seen the queues here. You're right opposite where there were queues for Rachel Reeves' speech just then. I mean, explain a little bit to everyone listening what it's like. I mean, it was massive, wasn't it, the queue getting in for that?
Yeah, it is massive. So what you've got at the conference, and you usually have at most party conferences, is a huge building where fringe meetings happen, where training for candidates happens. You have a hangar where you have all the exhibition stands, and you've got charities, you've got lobby groups, you've got media outlets. Anyone and everyone that's got enough money to buy a stall at a conference there, exhibiting their wares, peddling their wares, engaging with Labour Party members, politicians, and of course you get the Stardust walking through, so you will get all of the shadow cabinet doing tours of the exhibition where they get their photos taken with every brand that's there that they would like to be associated with. And then the third building is where you have all of the actual conference debates, so those main stages where you get those big speeches where, as we're recording, Rachel has just come off from giving a real barnstormer of a speech.
When you're speaking to people around the conference, what are they asking you? What do their priorities seem to be? What is everyone wanting when they talk to you about the events of conference?
They want to win. They haven't felt like this for a really long time, and the members are certainly in that space of feeling like they're on the cusp of victory. So discipline feels much higher than even last year, when there was a relatively agitated discussion, shall we say, about various different issues, including PR, which, as listeners well know, went through with a rip-roaring support of the members and the unions. This time there's none of that. It's very coordinated, very choreographed, very disciplined, because even those that are sort of maybe less enthusiastic about Starmer's leadership know that there's no point in rocking the boat now when they're this close to getting the keys to number 10.
What are your priorities while you're here? What are you pushing to people when you're speaking to them?
So our big push this year is around Brexit and getting that much closer relationship with Europe. So David Lammy's speech this morning talked a lot about that, the need to forget this little islander mentality, that we actually do need to work with, not against Europe, and have a far better relationship than the one that Johnson negotiated for us. So that's what we're doing. We've got these major policy areas that we're pushing Labour on. So beneficial alignment to give businesses the certainty that they need about standards, protections, regulations, aligning our regulatory framework to the EU wherever possible. We're pushing them on the independence of a board of trade, so that we have like an OBR for trade, so that when Labour's in government, they can do impact assessments on a statutory footing that Parliament can then debate and vote on. Those assessments can be sectoral, they can be nations of the UK. We need to know before we sign deals and before we renegotiate any deal with the EU how it's going to impact services, agriculture, fishing, manufacturing, etc. Because at the moment, the Tory government have been signing deals that have been to the detriment of lots of those industries. And then the third thing we're pushing them on is about youth mobility. We want 18 to 35-year-olds across the EU and the UK to have 5-year visas that gives them the right to live, work, study, love, have fun across the continent, as those of us who had our EU citizenship were able to do when we were those ages. Of course, I'd love it for everyone. I'd love it for every one of our listeners, many of whom are not going to benefit from an 18 to 35 scheme. Certainly I'm not, sadly. But I think that would be a wonderful cultural exchange from Brussels' perspective, to know that Brits were coming to Europe to learn languages and not be tied to 90 days, to be able to live and enmesh themselves in European culture. And similarly, great for us to have brilliant young Europeans helping us with plugging some of the gaps in our economy, but contributing to the life in Britain that we know and love, that can be this open, tolerant, united country that welcomes people from overseas. So we're really pushing Labour on those things, that alignment with the EU on regulations, independent board of trade, making sure that business has its voice when you're negotiating deals, and thirdly, let's try and restore some level of freedom of movement for the young.
The criticism of Labour often is that it's a little bit cautious and being slightly timid. Is it feeling like that's changing a little bit at the moment? Do you think that it's a little bit being a little bit bolder on Europe and otherwise?
Yeah, we've certainly seen more of that. I get the timidity, and polls are fickle. Polls are far distance out from an election, can be, very difficult to sort of take as read. You don't want to be complacent. That's the worst thing you can do, because if your activists think it's a done deal, then they're not going to go out and deliver leaflets in the rain and knock on doors in the snow. So it is really important to give your base a reason to turn out, knock on doors, and make them feel proud to be standing there with the rosette of your party's colour on it. So I get why they've been timid. I do think that they are right to start setting out that vision, because we are now in campaign mode. Sunak's speech was basically an election pledge last week. Let's see what Starmer says tomorrow. But everybody in the world of politics knows we are already in a general election period. And that means that voters need to start understanding, what does Starmer's Britain look like? How will it be different? Sunak set out quite a bit in terms of, it'll mean trams in Leeds, and it'll mean potholes being fixed in the north. Sorry, but you're not getting high-speed rail in the north. We need to know what Starmer's equivalent of that is. How many homes, how many hospitals, what kind of a vision has he got? What kind of ambition has he got for Britain? Because now they've got that poll lead, they need to solidify it by being much more clear about what 2025 UK is going to look like under Prime Minister Starmer.
On that clarity, when it comes to policy that's been discussed so far, what stood out for you? What's given you some semblance of hope? And what would you hope to hear in the next couple of days, from, as you mentioned, Starmer's speech that's happening as well?
Certainly in Starmer's speech, I'm really hoping to hear more of the international stuff. We heard a good chunk of that from Lammy this morning, and I really liked his commitment on international development. He talked about the Global South. He talked about Europe, and he talked about the Global South as areas of concentration for him as Foreign Secretary under a Labour-led government after the next election. We are globally facing such a horrific risk from climate change. That is going to have a huge impact on the poorest countries in the world, many of those in the Global South. And the migration patterns we are going to see as a result of that, as a consequence of crop failure, of water levels rising, of temperature rising, is going to be extremely challenging for humanity. And so I was really pleased to hear that he was making a commitment to restoring international development, making sure that Britain is funding developing nations to help them with that onslaught of pressure that's coming their way, and working with Europe, because they are the continent that we are in. They are the liberal democracies on our doorstep that are similarly going to be facing these challenges of that migration. So I think it's a really good signal to hear a politician stand up and loudly and proudly say Britain needs to work with the world, not isolating itself off as we've seen under the nativist government we've had for the last few years.
A lot of the discussion around the conference obviously can be quite dense and getting into policy and stuff like that, but we know there's plenty of fun to be had as well. What fun aspects are you looking forward to over the next couple of days? Have you got any parties locked in?
Well, you mean other than the Kebab Awards event with Best of Britain tonight? That is the hottest ticket in town, Jov. That's the one that everyone's going to be going to. We've got 600 people registered. My phone is pinging constantly with people saying, can you get me on the list? Can you get me on the list? So that's going to be really fun tonight. There'll be the Mirror Party, as usual, on Tuesday night, which is often seen as the pinnacle of 4 days of exhaustive conferencing, but yeah, there's, as I said earlier, just so many more receptions happening, so many more events, so you are sort of running around like a blue-ass tit trying to make sure that you poke your nose into all of them, and had a chance to speak to whoever's at each one. So plenty of fun still to be had. We're on day 2 of 4 now. Tiredness beginning to kick in, but we'll caffeinate ourselves, crack on through, and suffer with the consequences on Thursday.
Naomi, we miss you. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much. Miss you all too.